This curriculum was developed specifically for the instructor demonstration. I have developed a very similar curriculum before, but in order to avoid copyright issues, I chose to make a unique curriculum for this presentation. We are looking at the North Carolina Science Standard that reflects back on the processes, structure, and functions of living organisms that enable them to survive, and specifically looking at how those are applied to euglena, amoeba, paramecia, and volvox. Student learning targets are accessible, direct, and measurable. Students can argue if a thing is living or non-living, predict how a protist obtain energy based on their physical characteristics, and accurately identify those four protists, the amoeba, paramecium, volvox, and euglena. The lesson is going to begin with a type of hook to engage the students or help them connect to what they already know. In the lesson, I always tie back into the hook. In this particular curriculum, it tied back in very quickly, looking at what makes a thing living or non living and why fire isn't alive. I then like to break down some of these main points that students need to know. I've listed them here so students can see them all at once, but then break them down in detail, tying them into content later in the lesson or concepts students are already familiar with to help them better understand what those really mean, not just memorize the list. So here we're looking at something very familiar to students, the idea that goats eat and sunflowers need sunlight and Venus flytraps eat flies to help them understand some vocabulary terms. I also like to use very common examples for them to tie in complicated ideas like homeostasis. Students know they sweat when they're hot and they shiver when they're cold. They know that helps them keep their body temperature the same, and that just ties in a new concept. So using accessible examples is very important with middle school students. Backing up just a hair, I also like to include questions throughout the curriculum, not just as an assessment. These will be often lower level DOK questions where I'm just asking them to look at the content they've just read and reflect on how that on what that said. They may also be asked to apply it just a little bit beyond what they've read, or I can use these questions to address misconceptions. Notice that the diagrams that have been included directly relate to the content. These ideally would be broken into tabs or some other chunkable format for the students, but these diagrams have been created using Pixabay or Wiki Commons images that have been rearranged if they weren't usable in their current form to provide exactly what students need to see for this curriculum and leaving out extraneous content that can cause confusion and can just be a little bit overwhelming for students. I also like to include interactives whenever possible. I have hotspots interactives in this curriculum where students can click on the circled organisms and then those colored boxes with the visuals will pop up. Brief videos that are not instructive in nature but simply provide a visual for what's being described in the lesson because science is a very visual concept. Videos or even a series of images can be very helpful. I'm going through, I have chunked the protists down into two groups, the animal-like protists, and explain how they are both recognizable and meet the characteristics of life. And then at the end of that part where the animal-like protists, we do a drag and drop where students can engage with the content and move these pieces around into a screen reader friendly table. We then look at the plant-like protists. The format is very similar. It closely mirrors the information on the animal-like protists. The structure feels familiar to students. They can find content easily that they're looking for. They have a Venn diagram again here that ties back in that they have some shared traits that are common to all living things and how to tell these two different organisms apart. I then have this interactive activity where students have been given riddles. And instead of just asking the multiple choice questions, the riddles make it a little more fun, a little more engaging. Middle school students love jokes, um, like to find a little bit of humor in what they're learning. So this gives an excellent opportunity to provide that. They can drag and drop the organism's name next to the riddle and then receive feedback, helping them with mnemonic devices and different memory techniques. A lesson summary is important so students are able to see what main points they should have obtained from this curriculum. And then here you can see some different level questions. These first four are all going to be sort of your moderate level DOK questions where students are applying the content from the lesson, but these answers aren't directly in the curriculum, but there is one set answer for each of these questions. These last two questions are not extremely time intensive, but do get are questions that could be answered in different ways that have more than one correct answer, and that allows students to truly show the depth and breadth of their understanding of the curriculum.